Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the MouthFist Podcast. I'm Clint Eastwood, and I'll be your host. That's not very good, is it, Ryan?
No.
It
rarely ever is.
Never, ever. Sounds like Clint Eastwood in my head, but anyway, welcome to yet another exciting edition of the MouthFist Podcast. I'm Steven Saunders. This is Ryan Speck.
Greetings.
And I will be the horror translator. I'll repeat everything Ryan says through the entire podcast in a special, mildly retarded horror voice.
Welcome to episode 4. If you've listened
Welcome to episode 4.
If you've listened to the first 4 episodes, then thanks. And we're sorry. Hopefully this one will be shorter and more enjoyable.
Hopefully this one will be shorter and more enjoyable. Okay, I'm going to give up on that right now. So
please, for the love of God, do.
Oh man. And that's my attempt at pedestrian comedy. Thank you. Also, introing this episode is a clip from Coil's Hellraiser themes. Hopefully we don't get sued. That'd be nice. And a special Hellraiser-themed podcast.
Well, fortunately for us, all the members of Coil are dead, so...
All of them? I thought only, was it John Balance, ironically and laughably, lost his balance and killed himself?
I know he died. I just can't remember how.
He died in 2004, and he fell down a first floor landing in his home.
And then Peter Christopherson also died.
Oh, okay. Which one?
In November of 2010.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Coil is a very influential, experimental, industrial music project that I particularly loved a lot. I love Secret Domain. It's still one of my favorite albums. The Snow, Horse Rotivator, How to Destroy Angels. I'm a big... I don't know if I'm a huge fan of Coil, because most Coil fans I find...
It's hard to enjoy
weird,
Coil.
yeah.
I've listened to some of the stuff from Love Secret Domain. I've listened to How to Destroy Angels, which was not particularly impressive. I mean, that was their first shit that they released in 1984. I mean, they were the first spinoff of Throbbing Gristle, so...
Although the Coil mixes on Fixed from Nine Inch Nails was great. The broken remixes that were done, I think he did the Gave Up mix. That was awesome.
Yeah, Peter Christopherson obviously was pretty close friends with... Trent Reznor. He directed the original video that didn't get used for March of the Pigs. He may have directed the second live video that they ended up using. And he also directed the broken long-form video movie that was never shown.
I've seen some of the broken videos. They're quite good. I also really liked... I don't know if he directed the video for... I believe, if I remember correctly, that it was the first controversial video shown on MTV, and that was the Tainted Love cover that they did.
The Coil Tainted Love video got huge outcry from the gay community regarding the then new AIDS crisis, which was at the time considered a gay disease. And it was this, I mean, they basically did Tainted Love as a I guess kind of a fundraiser for AIDS-related charity, but
right.
And the video was really dark and had some leather daddy show up at the bedside of a guy dying of AIDS and kind of chuckle at him while eating grapes, and they took the whole thing as being anti-gay and mocking people who have AIDS, as opposed to reading anything into it. So they got a bunch of shit for that, which is also mentioned in the book that came with the black box Wax Trax CD set.
And I actually, Peter Christopherson dying is news to me. He died 2 years ago in 2010. I know this is not popping up in the Wikipedia articles, but didn't one of them have child pornography type of thing? Or am I getting that correctly? I don't want to associate that with somebody.
I have no idea, though I know that they lived in Thailand for a long time and lived next to those bars that have Thai teen boys that dance and stuff. They did one of their videos, I think it was one of the videos from Love Secret Domain.
Okay.
Was shot of just John Balance standing there surrounded by mostly naked teen Thai boys dancing around.
Now, I was gonna say they're both gay men,
yes.
and if they were like 18 or 19 years old, whatever, I always find it really strange when people find gay men who like, say, 18-year-old. I mean, they're really boys, but they're actually men. You know, they're to me, they're boys because they're like little kids. I mean, anyone under 25 is a kid to me. However, it's totally okay for a straight man to oogle a 15-year-old girl. That's perfectly fine, and say she's got a tight ass and blah, blah, blah. Guys say it all the time. You know, like, I can't drive past that school over there because those girls in Catholic schoolgirl uniforms, I'm just going to rape them all. I've actually heard that from a guy.
Who the fuck are you hanging out with, Steve? Perhaps we should get them on a list immediately.
This was a normal Canadian gentleman who's not really a friend of mine, but a friend of another person that I know. I won't even say what relation this person was because I don't want to get this guy in trouble, but because I don't think he's some kind of like, you know, child rapist, but it's just the things that dudes say, you know, like, and so if a gay man goes, oh man, I really like that 18-year-old boy's tight ass or whatever, I don't really see a problem with that. And if they want to oogle 16-year-old boys, great, just don't fuck them. Because someone's going to misinterpret that and say I support child pornography, but whatever. In fact, that's going to be taken out of context, and before I know it, I'm never going to be able to like cross the border or anything ever again.
Yeah. Let's just hope I don't edit that, so it's just a loop of Steve saying I support child pornography over and over again.
Oh, now I can do it to you too. So we can take turns with that.
Yeah.
Yep. So
there goes our campaign videos.
Aww.
We'll never be able to run for office now.
So moving on with
I'm Ryan Speck, and I support child pornography.
Ryan really did have aspirations to become a politician. He's just enough of an asshole to actually make the cut, though he might be too honest, which yeah, it's too bad. Sorry, Ryan. You're too honest. You got to be a lying douchebag to be any kind of politician. Even the nice ones are basically a step up from child molesters. Come on. So, I mean, I knew a local guy that ran for office and he lost, and I think it's because he's too nice of a guy who actually cares. So it's like he's a really, really nice guy, and he probably lost to get on like Oak Bay City Council. Just think Oak Bay is like super Ravenna for Seattle, like or whatever the rich neighborhood in Seattle is these days.
Speaking of politicians, This episode we're going to be talking about Hellraiser.
That's right. Speaking of politicians, Hellraiser comes to mind.
Leather-clad, knife-wielding monsters.
And I guess we won't also start talking about Suicide Commando and Hellraiser, which is basically, just for the industrial fans, Suicide Commando, only known by huge hardcore fans of industrial music, became hugely popular because they did a song called Hellraiser, and it became a huge club hit, which in industrial club terms means more than 200 people listen to it.
Yes.
So,
though now everybody aspires to be Suicide Commando, so
it's true. It's true. I wonder if Johann von Roy ever knew that people really, really want to be Suicide Commando. Anyway, moving on.
But at least it's pertinent because that album had so many goddamn Hellraiser samples on it.
And like what is Jesus Wept?
Wept. Yeah, there's at least 3 tracks that heavily sampled Hellraiser.
And speaking of sampling Hellraiser, another band that samples the living everfuck out of Hellraiser is Frontline Assembly. That, of course, it's like Aliens, Hellraiser, Aliens, Hellraiser, Aliens, Hellraiser, Event Horizon. Like, that's like what their sample sources are, apparently. Oh, and RoboCop and Hellraiser. And by the way, Hellraiser.
So, I believe we're all familiar with Hellraiser. If you're listening to this podcast and you've never seen Hellraiser at this point, then you're probably 12 and you probably shouldn't be on the internet. So,
or listening to this podcast, you poor motherfucker.
Well, as if all the child molestation so far has not already completely ruined that. But
and ruined us permanently. This may be the last MouthFist.
The police may be breaking in at any moment.
You know, there are people who hate us. You guys made fun of child molestation. I was molested. Yeah, whatever.
We both read The Hellbound Heart a million years ago.
Yep. I think both of us were like 8th grade, roughly, yeah.
Yeah, the book came out in 86. We both probably read it in, the early 90s.
I probably read it a couple years before you, because I'm a couple years older than you.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I read it around 8th grade, read it a couple times, loaned it to a friend, and never got the goddamn book back. So
I read it in the 8th grade while I was reading a bunch of Robotech books. I had one of my Warhammer friends suggested I read it, so...
apparently 186 pages. I just remember it being a book you could probably finish in less than 4 hours. And the fact that it was so goddamn expensive for the book, it was not worth me buying another copy for how long it was.
Right. I would agree. It's just to tell everyone what the Hellbound Heart is. I'm just gonna give some people some background. The Hellbound Heart is a horror novella by Clive Barker, first published in November 1986. By Dark Harvest in the third volume of the Night Visions anthology series, notable for becoming the basis for the 1987 movie The Smurfs. Hellraiser, and its franchise, and it was re-released as a standalone title by HarperCollins in 1988 after the success of the movie, along with an audiobook recorded by Clive Barker and published by Simon & Schuster AudioWorks. It retains the gory, visceral style that Barker introduced in his series of collected short stories, The Books of Blood. The story focuses on a mystical puzzle box, and the horror it wreaks on a family, which is unfortunate enough to come across it. So reading that makes me think, and also reading The Hellbound Heart made me think of Rubik's Cube. Did it make you think of that as well when you were reading it? Because I was like, this was inspired by a Rubik's Cube. It had to have been.
A bit, but at the same time, I had already seen Hellraiser at that point. So, I had a pretty clear vision, or at least I had seen parts of Hellraiser. I can't remember if I saw the entire movie first, but that was one of those video covers.
Yeah.
Used to go to our local grocery store, which had the little section of videos up front, and while my mother was buying groceries, I would stand there and peruse all of the horror movie box art.
Yeah.
There are a few that were very memorable, and Hellraiser was obviously one of them, with Pinhead holding the box on the cover. It was a very memorable image, and another one was Pieces with the dead girl and the chainsaw, which that movie turned out to be absolute dog shit. It was so bad.
But it was a cool
It's
cover.
weird. It's interesting to go back and watch all these 80s movies that you saw the box art for and then discover they were all really cheap and terribly made, which is not untrue for Hellraiser. It was pretty cheaply made. They worked on a shoestring budget and cranked the thing out based really closely to the novella. I can't say they made a whole lot of changes. In the novella, though, Kirsty was not their daughter. Kirsty was a friend of Frank's brother Rory and his wife Julia. It wasn't like a dad and stepmother situation. And Kirsty had a thing for the guy who became her father in the movie, so she was kind of, I guess, trying to steal away another woman's husband or something. But yeah, otherwise the plot is more or less the same.
Also in the Hellbound Heart, you get a more of a background of Frank, whereas in the movie,
it has a lot more background information, how Frank goes about getting the box, what he does to open the box.
And if I remember correctly, he located... Actually, I'm remembering it right now because he's locating the owner in Dusseldorf, and I believe in the owner of the box, and in Hellraiser, somewhere in Morocco. So they made it Morocco for the movie, and Dusseldorf, which is... I've been to Dusseldorf and Morocco, and I can tell you that Dusseldorf is far more
frightening.
Exotic and frightening, yes.
Yeah, they also did a lot more explaining of where the box came from and being built by Le Marchand and stuff like that in the novella. It wasn't really brought up again until... I don't even know if they brought it up until the third movie or something. They didn't really mention too much about the background in the actual movies. And they also explained a lot more what the Cenobites were like. The fact that Frank expected it to be some crazy sex experience, and it turned out that these creatures, they're supposed to be this religious order, and they've are perverted to the point that pain is pleasure. So he's completely unready to be taken by them and tortured for all eternity, which they of course bastardized in the movie and turned into this whole mythos of other retarded horseshit that I will get into later. But it was it was a much more clean and somewhat more mysterious concept. Sometimes the simplest answer is the best. The Occam's razor of the Hellraiser universe is the idea that they're just some crazy, weird demons who are interested in pain to the point of pleasure. Kind of I guess you could look at Slaanesh in the Warhammer universe as being heavily inspired by Hellraiser. But
yeah, Warhammer is so derivative, but that's what makes it wonderful.
They steal
and fun.
from the best, and then they improve on what they steal.
Now, what I was going to say is trying not to think about how we think of Hellraiser now, which I will warn listeners, even Hellraiser fans, is going to probably be a little more snarky, especially Ryan, and more for me, more dismissive. But at the time, when you were, 14, 15, what did you think of Hellbound Heart and Hellraiser when you saw it and read it? Or read it and saw it.
The fortunate thing for me is, I don't get too tied to the past or my own. I never get too clouded by nostalgia because my memory is so bad that I will forget things after 6 months to a year. So everything is a constantly new experience for me.
That's right. Ryan and I have become friends at least 14 times.
Yeah. Welcome to the first episode of the MouthFist Podcast. Every day is a clean slate for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't have vivid memories of a lot of it, and it's hard for me to look back and see it the way I did, but I seem to remember Hellbound Heart. I thought it was okay. I thought it was nothing special. It was the same thing as the movie. It had a little more background. I thought the first few chapters were kind of interesting, but then it was just very typical. I was never much of a horror fan. Reading horror, nothing really scares me, so the most horror writing just kind of totally blows past me. It doesn't really affect me at all, so I just kind of ignore it. I was more interested in Cabal. Cabal I really liked as a book.
That was an excellent book. I'm more interested in Weave World, but that's
I never read Weave World. All I ever really read was Hellbound Heart. I read some of the books of Blood. In particular, I had a copy of one of them that was retitled In the Flesh in the U.S. I think it was probably the 4th or 5th Books of Blood volume. Mm-hmm. And then I read Cabal, and that was about where I stopped. I just kind of...
I actually might because I don't have my, through some incident when I was about 18, I don't have a lot of my old books, and I would actually like to reread Books of Blood. I was going to say, I have the exact opposite problem Ryan does with memory. My short-term memory is absolutely wretched. Like this conversation right now, I'll probably forget half of it, an hour after I have it, but this time next week, I will remember everything in crystal clear detail. So I can remember reading the Hellbound Heart, the story, how I felt when I was reading it, how I compared it to other things I've read. I would say, and also Hellraiser, the subsequent film, I would say that the Hellbound Heart definitely had a influence on me as a writer because it showed me that I could write how I fucking want to and still retain decent writing, or at least what I perceive as decent writing. Your mileage may vary, but in the same with Hellraiser, I actually liked Hellraiser 2 more than Hellraiser. I liked Hellbound Heart more than the film Hellraiser because I left more to my imagination. Although I do enjoy Pinhead, as he became known as the Cenobites. Yeah. And I may have been the only kid that read Hellraiser and knew what Cenobite meant. Rather than, it's a priest. But so I don't associate Cenobite with demon like most people. Most people don't even know what the fuck that word means, except for it's a monster from Hellraiser.
One of the other changes they made from the book was the fact that the engineer was the leader of the Cenobites and I guess kind of interacts with Kirsty, basically is more of the Pinhead role in the movie was the engineer, whereas in the movie, they end up with the really shitty, stupid-looking monster.
Right.
Which looks like a upside-down aborted fetus.
Yeah, but to Clive Barker's credit, he redefined horror. I think without Clive Barker, the horror world would be a sad place. Like Ryan, nothing scares me. I'm nothing. Not even in real life do things really frighten me very often, if at all. I'm more afraid that I'm going to run out of bacon than about terrorists and shit. So nothing in horror, but I do it was interesting. I hadn't really read anything like that as a kid, quite like that. So it's like its own little puzzle box. It opened up all these new doors and pleasures I never even had expected by the age of 13 or 14. So
it definitely took horror in a different direction, away from what was at the time fairly stale slasher movies, and your most thoughtful horror creation at the time may have been fucking Freddy Krueger. So
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I still complained about the only good horror I was receiving were old copies of Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, and reading like Tomb of Dracula and Solomon Kane versus Dracula kind of stuff, or Solomon Kane was at Dracula's Castle or Castle of the Undead or whatever it was called, and yeah, there wasn't really much in the way of horror in horror films. Oh, Alien, like stuff like Alien, I guess was good, and Aliens in '86.
Yeah, but horror as a genre was for the most point pretty stale, so Hellraiser definitely brought something different to the table. It was a little more, I guess for most people it seemed kind of crazy. I guess for us it was probably pretty normal. It didn't seem like that weird of a concept. I know, like, it was one of those things that didn't particularly faze me, but...
Yep, and also, speaking of Hellraiser stuff, since, well, I'm going to say that a lot since we're only focusing on Hellraiser, maybe we should, before we continue talking about our opinions, maybe we should cover some of the things people are asking us to talk about.
Oh, boy.
Get this out of the way. My buddy Mike Allen...
And then I can shoot down all of their requests.
My buddy Mike Allen, who is a great artist I work with, says that Hellraiser 3, that's with the DJ Cenobite, isn't it, was filmed in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I lived there at the time. So it pretty much freaked me right now. I think he means right out. He's probably typing from his phone. And then my friend Chris Eng, he's also a writer. He's got a really awesome book coming out, which I'm sure we'll review at some point. How come everyone gets a cool name except female Cenobite? I want answers to this Cenobitorian misogyny. All caps. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I think it was more because they didn't have names and they just gave them the titles and the credits just as descriptors.
Right, so she became female. Yeah,
she became female Cenobite because she was the only Cenobite that was a woman. Pinhead was called Pinhead as a joke. That wasn't really his name. Chatterer because he had the chattering teeth, and Butterball because he was fat. It was they didn't have names. In fact, in the novella, it was pointed out that they were sexless.
Correct. And also, interestingly enough, the term Pinhead, when you call someone a Pinhead now, they think it's cool because you just called them like the Cenobite from Hellraiser, whereas Pinhead used to be a
misshapen skull that was small at the top.
Correct. It was an insult specifically with British people to call someone a pinhead. It's actually a descriptive term, but calling anyone a pinhead was like, it used to be more of an insult. It was like calling someone a douchebag. You're a pinhead. So, Jeff Henrin asked, Sinead O'Connor isn't a cool name. That's actually a good point. If we had a Sinead O'Connor Cenobite, that'd be interesting.
We do. It's the female Cenobite.
And Sean Mello says that they eventually rectified that. Her other name is Deep Throat. Mm-hmm. And then talk about raise a little hell by Trooper. Thank you, Ryan Rutley. Now I want to see another Hellraiser movie set on the farm owned by the midgets from that TLC show, Little People, Big Hell. Props to Jeff for a funny joke. And then my buddy Chris over in England says, I want to see a Hellraiser film that doesn't have Pinhead. Also the engineer from the book.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. You are our fucking hero. That's awesome. We talked about that.
But Pinhead was way overused. Obviously, I'll get into more of that shortly when we start talking about the other movies. But that was one of the things that was severely lacking, was a variety. I mean, apparently Hell is really slow and only has like 6 employees. So,
and Hell is for children.
Well, Hell is other people.
Hell is other people.
And you are those other people, Steve.
You're welcome, buddy.
So, obviously, we saw Hellraiser. We had varying opinions. It was a decent movie. I mean, it was pretty slim on content because it came from a novella. It was pretty much a direct adaptation, and it kind of suited it because it didn't overdo it. I mean, a lot of it was based more around Kirsty, weird shit with her, and Frank and Julia's thing. So...
And Clive Barker directed it as well.
Yeah, he directed and wrote the movie. So,
right.
So that's one of those things where there wasn't a whole lot of detail, but it didn't need any more detail than it had. It worked out pretty well. It wasn't overblown. Wasn't trying to fit too much into too short of a space, and the focus wasn't really on the Cenobites. It wasn't really on like the mysticism of Hellraiser. The focus was on people getting murdered to feed Frank and make him whole again, and Kirsty getting wrapped up in all the shit. And you also have the first instance of the really boring opening of the puzzle box. You expect this puzzle box, this mystical fucking thing that really requires this effort and desire to open, and apparently a ritual in the fucking novella. But yeah, it's pretty easily opened by any moron that comes along, and then it's really easily closed because apparently it's magic, but sending away Cenobites is as simple as just fucking closing the box, undoing the Rubik's Cube, as it were. And it can be done while being attacked, and every movie gets progressively simpler to close the box, to the point that close or open the box, to the point that people are opening or closing the box in seconds, like 1 to 2 second period to close the box and like send them back to hell, which was the ultimate irritating cliche of the series as it went along, that it became more and more focused on the Cenobites and more focused on retarded shit with what was basically running around in circles and then closing the box to send them back to hell. It was the same movie multiple times until they tried to change things up, and then...
That's something like what you're saying makes me think of, because I actually my eyes started glazing over, and it has nothing to do with you, Ryan.
It was memories of watching the Hellraiser movies?
They're boring. Like, I found them boring, and I do find, I mean, I guess I could watch, like...
They're conceptually interesting, but they're not good movies.
Yeah, they're not that great. It's. I mean, at the time I was interested because when these movies came out, and any movie like this came out, we just accepted for what we got. If we were into horror or science fiction or fantasy, this is why we watch shit like Lady Hawk or Krull. Krull is a piece of shit of a film. I don't care what anyone says. That's nostalgia talking. Shut the fuck up. Krull's terrible. It's fucking terrible.
I don't know. I'm not really susceptible to nostalgia, but I kind of like Krull. I accept that it's a crappy movie, but at least
that's what I'm saying.
It tries.
We had to. I mean, it did have a very simplistic plot and everything, but Krull is ultimately boring, kind of a piece of shit. It's what we accepted. But when I was a kid, dude, holy shit, I love Krull, and that's like, it's or watching the old D&D cartoons.
It sparks your imagination. It gives you ideas that you did not have previously, which Hellraiser did. The problem is the movies were not very good, and outside of the first one, the original series, I suppose, of the first 4 that were shown theatrically, the first one was the only one that's plot was vaguely decent.
Whereas I like the second Hellraiser a bit better, but it also, the second Hellraiser felt kind of like Evil Dead 1 and 2, where it's essentially the same story. So
yeah, the problem with the second one was the writing was kind of all over the place.
Well, they go to hell in that one, right?
Yeah, so the plot was kind of shitty, I feel.
With Leviathan.
Yeah, I mean, it gets into explaining the entire mythos, explaining the inner workings of everything, and like... then at the same time has the really retarded fucking ending, so...
You have a whole rant for the explanation of the Hellraiser mythos, which ties into the comic books, which we'll get to in just a minute, or 10. Continue with the Hellraiser film. So 2, I kind of like 2 more, but then again, I haven't seen 2 for 15 years, I think, so...
Yeah, I've seen them all fairly recently.
Yeah, you're way more up to date on Hellraiser than I am.
First one, decent movie. I mean, it's a little thin. I mean, the stupid ending with them throwing the box in the fire, and then the giant skeletal dragon bum guy, the weird creepy bum that's hanging around eating crickets or something, and then turns into a giant skeletal dragon that takes the box and flies away. It's like, what the fuck was that shit? Yeah, good thing that wasn't in the novella. That would have been a real fucking downer. But yeah.
And then a skeletal dragon flies away with the box.
That was inexplicable until you read the Epic Comics Hellraiser Bible, in which it explains the skeletal dragon and Clive Barker's concept about how that shit works. But that came after the second movie. The second movie set up a lot more of the like mythos as it got overused. You have Kirsty, after the events of the first movie, kind of being locked in an insane asylum. And then, of course, the guy that runs the asylum turns out to be somebody who wants to open the box and yada, yada.
How convenient. Okay, the more you remind me, I probably think I do like the first movie more than the second one, so...
The second movie had great aesthetics. You see a lot more of the Cenobites. It looked a lot better. It was better directed. Yeah. It was directed by Tony Randall, not the Tony Randall of... The
Odd Couple.
Of The Odd Couple. This would be the guy who directed Hellraiser 2 and a couple other movies, including some Power Rangers and shit like that.
We have an eternity to know your cleaning skills.
He also directed the live-action version of Fist of the North Star. What I'm saying is he didn't direct anything good other than Hellraiser 2. It's one of those things where he just kind of appeared, directed the one thing, kind of disappeared. He's remembered for the one movie. In the screenplay, though Clive Barker wrote the story, the screenplay was written by Peter Atkins, a guy who has written a few other things, mainly the Wishmaster movie.
Oh, dear God.
Wes Craven's Wishmaster, which was not good at all. And he also wrote the shitty Fist of the North Star movie. So,
see?
So he also, I think, maybe did a pass on Bloodlines, but everybody did a fucking pass on Bloodlines. So
Bloodlines, yeah, that was the fourth.
He also wrote some stuff, I think, for the Hellraiser epic comic. So he was a Hellraiser fan, obviously, but
I never read the epic comics of Hellraiser. Although, are those the ones that Boom is reprinting?
Yeah, the Hellraiser masterpieces.
Yeah,
is that what it's called? Yeah, those are the reprints of the old epic comic from the late 80s.
Right. Oh, I loved Epic. And so moving on to the movies, for Bloodlines.
Well, second one, as it goes on, you have the Cenobites show up a lot. Obviously, they go to hell. They open the box, and hell just stays open for whatever retarded reason. So they run off into hell. The Cenobites come out. They're like, "Hey, where'd everybody go?" And they all ran into hell. Kirsty comes across Frank in hell. Julia, in the course of the movie, Julia is let out of hell by the crazy doctor that runs the asylum, because that happens a lot. Mm-hmm. So the doctor releases Julia from hell using the mattress that she died on, in the same way that Frank comes back, starting that cliched horseshit where it's like, well, the idea worked in the first movie, so let's do the exact same thing again in the second one. And then they go to hell, they run around in circles, yada yada. The doctor gets taken and turned into a Cenobite for whatever reason, and then at the end of the movie, like after running around and trying to escape, Pinhead lets Kirsty go, and then like gets in a fight with the Dr. Cenobite, who proceeds to kill all of them and chases Kirsty and the mute autistic girl who can do anything, as is also another cliche of movies, the mute autistic that can do
I was gonna
magic.
say my autistic son can't do anything really like awesome power wise. Like I was hoping he could like. What's that?
Your kid's a piece of shit, dude.
I know.
You need
I'm
to turn him back in and get a better
I
autistic kid that can solve puzzles and shit.
Or at least like put us all in like a snow globe or some shit. Like,
so this entire podcast is actually taking place inside your child's imagination.
There you go. See, there you go, little buddy. Now you serve a purpose.
But yeah, Tiffany, the autistic girl,
was. Don't get that wrong.
Was a pretty big cliche too. Mm-hmm. So her and Kirsty get away, and they run away from the doctor and end up getting the giant tentacle that he's mounted on pulled out of the top of his head, and he gets killed after he's killed the other cool Cenobites that people actually liked, because I guess they decided that made perfect sense. We're going to end the second movie killing off all of the characters that are making us money.
Wait. Wasn't the doctor being attached to like a giant tentacle? Wasn't that in 3?
No, that was the second one.
That was the second. Oh, that was the second one. You're talking about the second one. I'm like, wait, I thought we were talking about Hellraiser 4.
No, because I never finished talking about the second one.
Oh, shit. I'm sorry.
Because to talk about the third one, you have to finish talking about the second one to get to the point where they kill Pinhead. And then the third movie, they have to bring Pinhead back. So they...
Oh, I see where I got confused. Yeah. I said moving on to Hellraiser 4, and we went on to... Okay, so...
Yeah. But we hadn't even finished with the second one yet.
Jesus Christ. That's what I get for not paying attention.
No,
okay, so...
You don't.
Yeah.
They take this really circuitous route to bring Pinhead back in the third one. Starts with a sculpture with Pinhead in the statue. It starts talking to the guy that buys it, and the box is like mounted into this stone sculpture of Pinhead. And
now I'm playing this through my head. Now I'm playing the movies through my head. Thank you.
And it's like it's just crap. The script of the third one is pretty shitty. It like tries. It's the movie that's all about Pinhead, because that's what people want, a movie that's just all about Pinhead. So it's Terry Farrell, mainly of Star Trek Deep Space Nine fame.
Yep. She's my favorite Trill.
As a reporter. I mean, and watching the third one again was really painful I mean, because there's it's cheesy, it's crappy, and there's just like shit going on everywhere. It's like Cenobites and horrible shit popping up in reality, and nobody seems to give a shit about it. It's like everybody's like, oh, look at all this horrible shit going on over here. Well, I guess that's completely explicable. Oh well, let's get back to business. It's like,
no, yeah, I was gonna say like the Cenobites being automatically created.
Yeah, that was something that now the Bible for the epic comic came in between. They started the epic series while the third movie was being made, and they started explaining some of the concept in the Bible, like Cenobites are created from the most perverse of humans. The people that open the box, they're the most dark, damaged individuals. Those are the ones taken and turned into Cenobites. The people that fit into Leviathan's scheme, because Leviathan, as opposed to being just some weird god, supposedly that's just a giant diamond-shaped box floating in the center of hell, it's actually this explicable god that is basically your typical cheesy sci-fi robot god that hates the weakness and the chaos of the flesh and wants to oppose his order on the weak flesh by taking it and turning it into horror concepts where it's just like mangled humans. That makes no goddamn sense. If you're gonna have like some god creating order out of flesh and basically punishing flesh for its chaos, that would probably not be the form that shit took. But this is what you get when you retcon your mythology into your story.
Right. And speaking, you mentioned the Hellraiser Bible. What is the Hellraiser Bible for myself? And because I've never read it. And
when they started basically trying to find some writers to work on the Hellraiser comic for Epic, obviously not everyone was familiar with Hellraiser at the time. I mean, the second movie was out on video, but it wasn't the type of thing where it is now where everybody knows Hellraiser. It's a pretty standard stock image that people understand. Talk about Pinhead and Hellraiser, and they at least recognize it. So they had to send around this kind of Bible to some of the writers who wanted to write stories for it, explaining what is Hellraiser, what's the Clive Barker's Hellraiser comic going to be about, what the mythos is like, the concepts. They explain Leviathan as a god, this sentient thing that wants to impose its will, its war on the flesh, the boxes, how the lament configurations can come in all these different forms, because apparently having the one box built by Le Marchand wasn't enough. Apparently there's just shitloads of objects everywhere, and anything can be a box, and it can take any shape, anything that has a puzzly aspect. And
so it's like Friday the 13th, the series.
Yeah, and apparently they say, hey, there's 10,000 keys to open hell. Because apparently you can't leave a simple concept alone. You have to make it as complicated as possible.
And just so you know, there is an airport in or near Detroit, so all roads lead to hell. Yeah. Just so you know. All right.
And they explain the Cenobites, how the Cenobites are made, how their flesh is removed and restructured into new creatures, how they have these pets that are these monstrous creatures that work for them, how hell works, why people are in hell, how they're being used to fuel Leviathans like war and stuff like that, and then talking about the themes of the stories, what they wanted to cover, what kind of information they were looking for. And it's basically this 14-page document that covers what writers need to know to write a Hellraiser story.
Right.
So it explains a lot of the concepts, going so far as to explain the skeletal dragon was in fact the protector, because every box has a protector, and the protector, after something happens, takes the box back and provides the box to people. Because you remember the Asian guy that's at the very beginning and the end of Hellraiser, kind of that gives the box to Frank. And at the very end, he is obviously giving the box to somebody else. So they're the people that provide these puzzles to people to be opened, because apparently hell is a horrible prank show where they have their inside man provide you with the box, and then you open it, and it's like, surprise, you're going to hell. And then he sets it up for the next people on candid camera.
I was going to say, I always knew Ashton Kutcher was related to hell somehow.
Yes.
So,
Ashton Kutcher is a Cenobite.
No, it makes total sense. Wow.
So apparently the bum that turns into the skeletal dragon is also like a protector of the box. And it's like adding a lot of like detail that's just, and you start to think about these concepts. You're taking this really simple, mysterious, mystical box created by occultists, opens this gateway to hell, and these like basically sadomasochistic pain demons pop out and take you away. You take this really simple, mysterious, interesting concept and you start watering it down by explaining every detail, because nothing ruins a horror concept by explaining absolutely everything.
Speaking of which, let's continue with the movies really quick before we go back into the comics. We're going to have a lot to talk about the comics, and I don't think we need another hour and a half podcast unless you really, we really want to torture our listeners. All three of you.
So the third movie covers mainly how Pinhead gets to be Pinhead again after being killed, but then somehow trapped inside a fucking statue, and he comes back, and after they've said that these Cenobites are created in hell for these very specific reasons for very specific people, Pinhead goes about just killing anybody he sees and then making a bunch of them into crappy Cenobites. The DJ Cenobite that throws razor edge CDs, and the sex obsessed dude that has like, while cool looking, has the moving piston going through his head.
And just so you know, the best part of the Hellraiser movies was it Doug Bradley and his how he delivers his lines. Like, and I have
though hearing it without the effect that they use on his voice really ruins those lines.
Really, I can actually kind of do them without, like, I didn't know they did an effect on his voice.
Like, he talks normally and then they pitch shift it down slightly and add a little distortion to it.
Oh, so you're like, we have an eternity to know your flesh, or that sound is like razors through flesh. You know, like, and that's just me right off the cuff. I can usually do a pretty good version of his voice, but I didn't know they pitched it down.
No, he just says it normally. When you hear his normal speaking voice, he delivers it like that. He delivers it with a little drama, but they modify the voice to make it sound more alien. So,
I mean, you can do the voice. I can do the voice without effect. So
yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. Yeah,
okay.
The lines are the best part,
there,
though.
But usually
the best part of 3 really is all of the lines that, of course, got sampled over and over again. I think that was the problem with 3. It had no plot, but it had a bunch of like really cool lines.
Yeah, that we call that Frontline Assembly's Millennium. Mm-hmm. That's that film.
And that, of course, had a lot of the like Jesus-related things with him melting the cross and pulling the PIDs out of his head and sticking him through his hands for no reason other than to just do it. It was pretty crap. And then Terry Farrell has to send him back to hell by making him remember his life on Earth, because she does all this research and talks to his spirit and like learns all about him in World War II.
I thought it was World War
I. I can't remember. But him basically being in India and experimenting with the box and getting himself killed, and that's how he became a Cenobite. I don't know why they chose him, because he didn't seem like that bad of a guy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, now all I want to do is do Hellraiser lines, like, this will seem like a memory of heaven, like that kind of shit. So, yeah.
Yeah, so third one was pretty crappy, but it ends with them throwing the box in the concrete underneath the building that's being constructed, and then inside of the lobby is all Hellraiser themed, and all of it looks like the outside pattern of the box, and Pinhead's back in hell, and everything is set back up to make another crappy movie, which in this case is Bloodlines, which was the weirdest because the production was a total clusterfuck. The movie was directed and partially, I mean, it went through so many goddamn scripts, it's not even funny, but Bloodline was directed by Kevin Yeager and written by Peter Atkins, who worked on a lot of it, but then the script got rewritten. I'm not sure how much Peter Atkins rewrote of his own script or if other writers came in to work on it, but basically Kevin Yeager directed this movie that had very little to do with Pinhead, actually. It had to do with the creation of the box. Okay, it is World War I. I thought it was, but yeah.
Continue, sorry.
After I thought about it for a second. So Bloodline, you have the story of how Le Marchand creates the box, and then his modern contemporary dealing with the effects of his great grandfather making the box or something. So you have this story of Le Marchand creating this box for a rich aristocrat who summons a demon and binds it to the box, and all this shit happens, and these big balls, and you have this big hour-long story that takes place in I believe, the mid to late 18th century, and you have all this stuff goes on, and it goes on for fucking half the movie, and then the second half of the movie takes place in the modern day, where his relative basically has to deal with the box, and this demon comes back, and the stuff in the building, and basically a lot of what you end up seeing in the movie, and Pinhead shows up and basically takes her and makes her into a Cenobite and stuff.
Yep.
And she's been like living for centuries. That she's just this demon that's been in this body and has been giving immortality to one of the guys that summoned her, and they wander around forever until the modern day, at which point she comes to America to find Le Marchand's descendant, John Merchant, I think, or one of the merchants. They changed their names. John Merchant. And then during the process of making this movie, like, the studio, they've already filmed pretty much all the movie. The movie's pretty much almost done. And the studio, having read the script a million years before, realizes, hey, Pinhead doesn't show up till the end of the movie. And they're like, well, yeah, that was the fucking story. Pinhead's barely in it. I mean, he's there, but it's not the focus. They're like, well, Pinhead needs to be in more of the movie. And they're like, yeah, but we already made the fucking movie, and Pinhead's not in most of it. And they're like, well, we want to reshoot the movie, and I'm not sure. I think Kevin Yeager.
Is that why he's
Kevin
credited
Yeager
as Alan Smithy?
Yeah, Kevin Yeager was basically forced off the movie with their idiotic requests. They basically rewrote some of the movie. They changed the first section. The first part of the movie, they changed the way that worked. They cut it down severely. The part that takes place in the 18th century is way the fuck shorter and substantially different as far as the plot goes.
18th century? Wasn't it 400? Wasn't the 17th century? So you're talking about Philip
Le Marchand?
Le Marchand. He's
was it in the 1600s?
The flashback is shown around 400 years ago.
I thought it was the 1700s, but...
Oh, it could be the 1700s if it's taking place in 2127.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
The movie takes place... Yeah, once they change the movie. Okay, that's the thing. They basically, they have the 17th century shit going on. They have the modern day shit going on.
18th century. Nothing. I was just being a bit.
Oh, yeah. It was. Now you got me confused, asshole. Okay, so, yeah, 18th century... 18th century, 20th century, those were the two parts. They cut the 18th century part way down. They refilm parts, and then they create this bookend that takes place in the 22nd century, where the descendant, Dr. Paul Merchant, is on this space station. He's going to destroy Pinhead and the Cenobites forever by summoning them, yada yada. It's a stupid idea. So basically they create this very kind of alien thing where it's this dark, because apparently you build a space station, but you build it to be grimy, dark, and dripping water everywhere, because...
Which makes perfect sense.
I know in space, if you built something like that, that's the first thing you do is have very poor lighting, and so yeah, it's just kind of mediocre and like bookends. And it kind of over-explains everything. He tells the story in flashback to these people that have come onto the ship and stopped him from destroying Pinhead, and then Pinhead kills everybody, and then it's way more about him destroying Pinhead and telling the story of how it got there than it is about the boxes and the Merchant family. So the cobbling together of parts obviously was going to structurally weaken the film as it got taken over, and all this re-editing towards the end of the movie.
See, it was a
poor concept to begin with.
It was about this point in the Hellraiser movies I began to wonder why. I mean, I knew why. I mean, this is like, 96? I was like 20, 2021.
Yeah, that was the only one of the movies I think I saw in the theater.
Well, I was going to say, I saw it in the theater as well, and the thing that I noticed about it was they're really trying to make Pinhead a sympathetic character in order to, like, I didn't understand why they, like, made him a sympathetic. That's why, you remember you said he didn't seem like such a bad guy.
Yeah, in the third movie, they work hard on making the person that he was a sympathetic, nice character. And then, because they did that, started that in the second one, Kirsty shows them the pictures of who they were before they were Cenobites, making them remember their lives and forget their duty for a second to let her get away. And then they try to stop Dr. Chenard, and he ends up killing them and using their weakness against them and turns them back into their previous forms. And then murders them, like Butterball is a kid and stuff like that. And it's like, how did how was a child evil enough to get turned into a fucking Cenobite?
Moving on to Hellraiser 5, because Hellraiser
4 was a clusterfuck, and after that they stopped making the movies. They stopped for years working on Hellraiser stuff, and that was the end of the theatrical run. There was never another theatrically released Hellraiser movie.
That's right.
Until someday they eventually release a remake, which it needs a goddamn remake and reboot. Obviously, from what we've talked about so far, the movies were not exactly fucking hot shit, so remaking or rebooting this series is not going to hurt anybody's feelings except for retards who think this shit is a lot better than it is.
Well, my friend Ed K actually said that Clive Barker tweeted the other day that there is interest in new Hellraiser and Nightbreed projects. Said he couldn't say more. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, they've been trying to reboot it with Clive Barker helping on the reboot for years now. They've gone through a bunch of directors that have come on, started on the pre-production, and then dropped out of the movie. They've been through at least like 4 or 5 directors that have been trying to do a Hellraiser remake for years now. I think they may have even talked to Guillermo del Toro about doing it, and he was going to do it for a while and then stopped.
Guillermo del Toro is really notorious. I'm going to call him Guillermo del Notorioso, actually, because he's notorious for saying, like, I'm going to do the Mountains of Madness. Oh, never mind. Oh, I'm going to do this. Never mind.
He is your typical excited, like... Nerd comic fan who gets super excited about everything he wants to do but doesn't have a lot of follow through.
I can hear that. I can understand that and sympathize. So moving on, like, to Hellraiser 4 sucked. We can all agree. Hellraiser 5, which is called Inferno. Yep, was released in October of 2000. Is my favorite of
and
the
it's
series.
My favorite, so we can at least agree on the fact that we both like it the best out of the series. It is hated by Clive Barker and considered by most people to be the worst movie out of the entire series up until the last few were released, which I find hilarious that Clive Barker thinks that's the worst, given how fucking shitty his writing is.
Well, I don't know. I don't quite agree with the shitty Clive Barker writing, but I've read Weave World and there's other stuff.
And I've read his new fucking comic. So
Right. We'll get to that in just a minute. But the thing with Hellraiser Inferno is I think it's the one that actually captures the spirit of Hellraiser the best.
Yes.
I mean, I know Hellraiser fans that hate it and blah, blah, blah.
It's not the most original concept, but it's definitely the one that breaks the most with the cliches that have been set up for the first 4 movies.
Right. I mean, a lot of Hellraiser fans have told me it's not in the spirit of Hellraiser. They think that. I think it does because...
I say to them, fuck you. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is the ultimate spirit of Hellraiser.
And it's the most interesting of what I've seen. I remember I saw Hellraiser 6 a little bit and said, fuck this fucking series, and I was done. So if Clive Barker hates this, apparently... all respect to Mr. Barker, he's a great guy, but I have to disagri.
He's fucking wrong. This...
Yeah, because maybe it's because he had nothing to do with the film. At this point, Hellraiser is just a brand name.
Yeah, I don't think it was dark enough for him. The problem was this was the early days of being shot entirely in HD digital.
Yeah.
This was the early days of digital. There were very few movies that were doing digital at the time. And one of the problems with digital is it was very bright and it was hard to make everything look like dark and grimy like you can get on film with low light.
But it still looked dark. I mean, and just for, by the way...
It's kind of bright. It does look bright into comparison to the other movies. It lacks that kind of visual quality that the other ones have because it was 2000. They didn't have that level of like treatment yet, and the budget was not high enough for them to really invest in like really upping their digital film game and making it look a lot darker.
Well, speaking of Barker and his other stuff he's done, Nightbreed, Craig Sheffer was in Nightbreed.
Yeah.
And For our listeners, I'm going to go over the plot really quick because this actually Wikipedia article here has the entire plot. It's a spoiler alert, just so you guys know. So
yeah, everything in this is fucking spoilers.
Joseph Thorne is an intelligent yet shady Denver police detective. One day he comes across a series of bizarre, brutal, and ritualistic murders and is driven into obsession with the puzzle box associated with the crimes, known as the Lament configuration, eventually solving the puzzle. Upon solving the box, he becomes obsessed with unmasking the mysterious figure connected to the crimes, known only as the Engineer. When discovering that the Engineer has kidnapped a child, he begins hunting for the figure, who in turn taunts him, killing off many of his friends, leaving one of the child's fingers at every crime scene. Eventually, he is driven into insanity while working on the case and is subjected to various psychological torments for much of the film, such as brutal hallucinations, and soon discovers that this is only the beginning of his punishments for the cruel life he led. The Cenobites, a race of mutilated demons, eventually appear to him, and the lead Cenobite, Pinhead, reveals that all of the events have happened because he has been in the labyrinth ever since solving the box. It is also revealed that the Engineer is a personification of his cruelty. Pinhead proceeds to wrap chains and hooks around Joseph's face and informs him that this is only the beginning, and that he will have to repeat the events for all eternity as a consequence for the cruel life he led.
Yeah, and opening the box. Yeah,
I don't know.
It works pretty well. He opens the box after fucking a hooker and doing some coke, and opens the box, and then that's where the plot really starts with the murders and the child's fingers, except for the crime scene at the very beginning. Like, the thing takes off after he opens the box. I mean, which I think is, the smartest use of the Hellraiser concept ever. You see a lot of, like, people getting chased by monsters, but you don't see a lot of actual, like, torment going on. I mean, even when it showed like Frank's hell, it wasn't that interesting. You're there for a few minutes. Frank is basically stuck in a dorm room in hell watching naked women writhe under sheets that he can never touch.
Yeah, yawn. And the other thing too is it's basically
that's horrible.
I also like to call this the Hellraiser Groundhog Day. But the thing also is, although the brightest looking of the Hellraiser movies, it is the darkest in tone.
Yeah,
it has a nice dark twist ending, and
they tried really hard to do the exact same thing with Hellseeker. I thought Hellseeker was a lot more boring, but it was more or less the exact same movie over again. That was the problem. They find an idea that works and then they repeat it ad infinitum. They did that with fucking the first 4 movies. It's like Pinhead, 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 Pinhead. And then Inferno worked at least for the movie making process and getting a completed product.
Inferno wasn't even a Hellraiser movie to begin with, wasn't it?
It was.
It was. Okay.
To the best of my knowledge, the last couple were not Hellraiser movies. They were Deader and Hellworld were basically, I think, unrelated scripts that were turned into Hellraiser movies. But Inferno and to the best of my knowledge, Inferno and Hellseeker were both intended to be Hellraiser movies.
Hellseeker, I'm going to read the plot to Hellseeker. I don't even know if I've seen Hellseeker. It's got Dean Winters. I love Dean Winters, but I don't think I've seen Hellseeker, come to think of it.
Yeah. For those of you at home, if you're regular viewers of 30 Rock or see a lot of TV commercials, the guy that plays Dennis Dunphy, Liz's douchebag ex-boyfriend who calls her dummy all the time, or is in a lot of commercials for auto insurance. Yeah, he is he's also the lead. I never saw Oz. It was not of interest to me.
He was one of the brothers in Oz. The Irish characters. I was going to say Dean Winters plays Trevor, who survives a car accident and apparently kills his wife, Kirsty Cotton. When the car plunges off a bridge into the river below, Trevor manages to escape with his wife, but even though police officers find both the car doors open, there's no sign of Kirsty. Blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read this whole thing.
It's the same plot as Inferno.
Yeah. So the person on the table's not
Guess what? Guess what? He's in hell.
Yeah, it seems that she has pinned all the murders on Trevor and shot Trevor through the head, leading him to crash the car in the river.
Yeah, like Kirsty basically goes crazy, and he is like plotting to like kill her and take her money, basically.
Yeah. The person on the table is not Kirsty, but in fact him. He is the fifth soul in his entire time. And this entire time he has been in hell, living in limbo.
She opens the box. He brings home the box and gives it to her. She opens it and makes a deal with Pinhead that she will give him souls in exchange for her freedom, and proceeds to kill a bunch of people, which is really not like Kirsty in a way. And I mean, obviously it's non-canonical anyway, because Kirsty is obviously in all the new comics written by Clive Barker.
Yeah, and that's the thing
so
too. Is
he takes
like
his own retarded turn on it. So
I think I have seen Hellseeker. Even with my amazing memory, I confused the two movies.
It looks good. It's definitely a much darker looking movie. I think it was the atmosphere and style that they wanted for Inferno, but weren't able to get because of the technology at the time. I mean, Hellseeker was 2 years later, but by that point, digital video technology had already progressed to such a point that they were able to pull off a much better looking movie, even if a couple of the CG effects and some of the details of the movie were really goddamn stupid. Overall, it's an okay movie. I think I gave it like a 6 out of 10. I mean, it's got a lot of decent stuff in it, but overall, the movie itself is kind of boring.
So the other one, and the next one is Hellraiser Deader.
Deader was
never seen it.
Was written as a completely different script called Deader. That was about like some cult and a woman like tracking down this weird cult. And basically, I think the Weinsteins bought the script and then proceeded to, after sitting on it for years, threw it into a Hellraiser movie and rewrote it. And the guy who wrote the script actually came out and like said that he like basically disavowed it just about. They said it sucked, that it didn't work, that the movie was undoubtedly going to be shitty because like that wasn't what the movie was supposed to be about. They changed his script, and it was a little bit sour grapes about it, but at the same time he was also right. He had kind of a shitty attitude about the whole thing. It was a little unprofessional, but at the same time, he was pretty much right on all counts too. So I can't completely blame him.
Right, and next up, like I haven't seen it. Like I this is where I've given up.
The big highlight is it stars Kari Wuhrer. So that's
okay.
The only. Most of it takes place. You've seen Control, right? We talked about that previously. Yep. You know how a lot of it takes place. You know the parts in the subway where
it was filmed. It was filmed in Bucharest.
Yeah, it has the same kind of the feel on the film because it's.
Wait, that's Romania. Actually, if it was filmed in Bucharest, that's Romania.
Yeah, that's where they film most shitty, cheap movies for the late 90s and 2000s. It's got that Eastern European feel, and most of it takes place in like subways and shit. So.
Oh yeah, and which are epic in Eastern Europe. Yep.
Yeah, it kind of like reminds me of Control, if Control were a really terrible cliched horror movie that takes place in like dark subway tunnels and stuff. So it was a real non-event. I watched that movie like once and was like, well, that was pretty lame. And then Hellworld, the last Hellraiser movie for like 6 years. I've never seen the latest Hellraiser movie, but apparently it's so good. Apparently, Hellraiser Revelations, which we will skip, came out in 2011, and it's so goddamn reprehensible that no one even talks about it.
Well, here the plot to Hellworld really quick. Yeah. I'm going to give the first lines of this off Wikipedia.
The only detail you really should know about Hellworld is it stars Lance Henriksen. That's the only useful information, but otherwise...
The film introduces a circle of youths who are addicted to playing Hellworld, an online computer game. Done. Not even reading anymore. I don't even want to see it. Done.
But no, finish reading the plot.
Oh.
No. I had to watch the goddamn thing. The least you do is read the plot.
The film introduces a circle of youths who are addicted to playing Hellworld, an online computer game based on the Hellraiser series. The film opens up at the funeral of Adam, one of the friends who was obsessed with the game and ultimately committed suicide after becoming too immersed in the game. And then a bunch of people trained his funeral. The remaining 5 friends blame themselves for not having prevented Adam's suicide. You want me to continue? Do I need to continue?
Yeah. You just skip towards the end details if you want.
2 years later, blah, 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 Hellworld party, blah, 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 blah. The host, Pinhead, blah, 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 holding herself up in the attic, Chelsea, blah, 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 psychedelic, blah, blah, blah. Later, the host sits in the bedroom going through the suitcase containing Adam's possessions. He finds and opens an actual Lamartian's box, which summons the real Cenobites. Pinhead praises Adam's ingenuity and mocks the host's disbelief before Chatterer and Bound tear him into pieces. Jake and Chelsea are shown driving to the Sunrise, and they receive a mysterious phone call from the host, who suddenly appears in the backseat. The two almost crash the car, but are able to stop it. The last scene shows the police entering the bedroom in which the host opened the box, the wall blood smeared in the box lying on the floor. The end.
Yeah, so the whole thing is like a Hellraiser movie, but it turns out that none of it's real because it's all like a Scooby-Doo rubber mask, like trying to make them think that it was really Pinhead, but it's like the guy that brought them there killing them for some absurd reason. I think it's because like they're responsible for somebody's death, so he's punishing them or something.
Fucking
and
terrible.
then he opens the actual box, and then Pinhead's real.
Okay, single theater show, the 9th film, Hellraiser Revelations, which that doesn't even look like Pinhead in that picture.
No, because Doug Bradley was done at that point. He said after Hellworld that he wasn't going to do any more of the movies, which is funny because apparently he was kind of like irritated apparently when they didn't ask him to do the new theatrical one that they were going to do. He basically retired from being Pinhead and then was annoyed about the fact that they didn't ask him to be Pinhead when they were going to do a reboot.
It's the first entry in the series since Hellraiser based on an original script, instead of incorporated series antagonist Pinhead into an unrelated horror story. So I guess every story after I was right, Ryan. Ha ha! Wikipedia maybe is right.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
I don't know. I've never seen any evidence that there were like scripts before that, because I've seen, I actually have the script to like Deader and stuff. I mean, it very well could be. I mean, because most of them feel like they're kind of unrelated, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, Hellraiser is supposed to be an anthology series, even by like Clive Barker's like explanation in the fucking Epic Series Bible. It's not supposed to be about the same goddamn thing all the time. It's supposed to be all about all these different concepts. There's 10,000 boxes and shit like that, yet there's only one goddamn box in the movies and only one goddamn thing ever happens.
Yeah, I'm not gonna read through the plot, but apparently
it was apparently the worst out of all the movies. It has a fucking 3 on IMDb.
The film has received almost universally negative
1,195
reviews.
votes. Usually to have as low as a 3 with over 1,000 people voting, you either have to be terabad or you have to like, if you have 20 people voting on it, there's a possibility it's going to be skewed, but like that many people, apparently Revelations must be dog shit terrible. And it was written by a special effects guy, which you know is going to be a bad movie when it's written by the guy responsible for the special effects. Because he's just going to find as many ways as possible to fit cool special effects ideas into a script.
Right, Clive Barker and Doug Bradley have made no official comment on the film. Barker's only comments have been in response to ad copy that the film comes from the mind of Clive Barker. He posted on his Twitter feed, "I want to put on record that the flick out there using the word Hellraiser is no fucking child of mine. Have nothing to do with that fucking thing. If they claim it's from the mind of Clive Barker, it's a lie. It's not even from my butthole." See, I like Clive Barker. It's not even from my butthole.
Well, his new comics are from his butthole.
Okay, let's get to the comics, because we've been yapping about the films.
The movies, obviously, there's been some ups and downs to the movies. Obviously, it was kind of a downward spiral from the first movie down through the fourth. The fifth one brought things back up, I think, to a decent par, but it was kind of unrelated to what a lot of people wanted to see. And then since then, it's just been like bad. Even though the fifth one may not have been written originally as a Hellraiser script, they at least managed to fit all the concepts in fairly seamlessly. Yeah. I mean, the movie obviously was going towards a whole, like, he's in hell the whole time anyway thing. It's not
and number 6, they did that again, probably because they just wanted to do they like the twist of 5, so they just wanted to redo it with some, and put Kirsty in there. Yeah.
And make it a little better looking to make it an easier sell. But yeah, the rest of it's like bad fanfic anyway, so the third and fourth movie weren't fucking bad fanfic.
Yeah, the only thing is, like, the reason why I was so impressed by Inferno is because I was like, oh, finally a Hellraiser movie that doesn't suck. Like, I mean, they all kind of suck in their own way.
It was the most plausible as far as the plot went. It was the one where everything actually makes goddamn sense.
Right.
It's the only one that doesn't have huge sections where nothing happens or the plot doesn't go anywhere, or it doesn't make any fucking sense, or it's not just like shit. It's the only one that's not full of shitty ideas. I mean, it's got some silly parts, but it's at least interesting. I still like watching it. I watched several of them again recently, and it was the only one I think that I still hold any fondness for, other than like the first two for more aesthetic reasons than like writing.
Right. And of course the lines. That's the best lines ever, as we talked about before.
But they're so overused that you can't even...
Yeah.
You never think about sampling that shit again, unless you're a tool, I guess. But
now, moving on, like we're going to talk about the comic books.
Yeah, the new Hellraiser comic.
And they're coming out from Boom Studios. First off, I would like to thank Boom Studios publicly for making it so easy for reviewers to read their comic books. Like, if you're a reviewer, drop Boom Studios a line, and they are very cool about you reading like review PDFs and stuff like that. And this is how Ryan and I were able to read, mostly Ryan, since I haven't had time because of a lot of work stuff and Facebooking, apparently.
You did a little skimming, but I did the lion's share of reading.
And they did a Hellraiser Masterpieces, which is the re-release of the Epic Comics.
Yeah.
And they're releasing a whole
Some
new
a lot
series.
better than others. Yeah. Some of them are interesting, but for the most part, I think the Epic stuff was a very mixed bag, and I don't think any of it was like that great. So. And
I think, and reading from the Epic stuff back, like I back from years ago, and reading the re-release stuff, re-release material, I would say that they're basically just horror stories with Pinhead in them, or horror stories with Hellraiser elements in them.
Yeah, the one of the best ones I read was barely even linked to Hellraiser at all. It was called The Tontine, and I'm sure you know
the Tauntaun.
Hellraiser Strikes Back. I'm pretty sure you know pretty well what a Tontine is, but
the Hellraiser Strikes Back. Sorry, whenever I hear Tontine, I think of Tauntaun.
But yeah, it's about guys getting together every year after coming back from, I forget which war it was supposed to be. I forget if it was World War II, but every year after they come back, they play Russian roulette until like all of them are dead, basically. It was interesting, and basically the gun turns out to be the puzzle.
But the puzzle box, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was barely even related. I mean, it could have been it could have been anything other than Hellraiser. It still would have worked, but yeah. The new one is Clive Barker's Hellraiser, as opposed to Hellraiser Masterpieces. And it's actually written by Clive Barker with different writers contributing. It's written by Clive Barker and somebody for pretty much every issue of the series. It's different people. There's several episodes written by Christopher Monfort. I think the art on most of them, if not all, is done by Leonardo Manco, who does his art's really good. I mean, the art is good. Yeah. The cover, almost all the covers are done by Tim Bradstreet.
Yeah, the covers are great.
Tim Bradstreet does great work, even if it is fucking tracing. But
yeah, well, it's not like Greg Land tracing. So
yeah. Yeah, he actually takes the photos that he traces from. So.
Yeah. Bradstreet is a motherfucking artist of the motherfucking highest caliber. He is awesome.
Got his really start cool with White Wolf, really.
Yeah, it's true.
Doing all the covers for all of the White Wolf books.
He's probably the reason why anyone of us picked up, like why I picked up Vampire the Masquerade or anything like that, because the art was great. I mean, I knew it was obviously photograph, reference art, but it looked awesome. And
I saw a lot of his art firsthand back in like 1994 at Dragon Con. He was there, had his own booth down in like the dealer's room, and got to see a lot of his art up close.
Actually, some of it was, speaking of Bradstreet, some of my favorite Bradstreet art is him using Thomas Jane for Punisher stuff. So he's and also just any of Bradstreet's Punisher is great, but
the Bradstreet covers might be the highlight.
He used Tom Jane for, I think, Criminal Macabre, like Steve Niles stuff. Sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, the Tim Bradstreet covers might be the real highlight of the series.
Yeah, see, I'm already tangenting on Tim Bradstreet. So yeah, so there's what 12 issues so far.
There are 11 issues so far. I don't know if it's a 12 issue series, but
wait, I think issue 12 just came out.
Oh.
Or is it's coming out? Yeah. I think I just got the email from Boom giving me the link.
Yeah, I think 11 was the last one we read We both read 11. You skimmed it, and I looked over it. I mean, the series, for me, it's dog shit. Like, I can't like it at all because for me, it just doesn't, it doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, some of the concepts are interesting, but it's a really stupid idea. It's like Clive Barker delving really hard into the fucking mythology of hell. It's all taking place in fucking hell with Pinhead. Pinhead's turned into a fucking emo kid. He's like, I'm bored with killing people. I'm sick of this. He's like, I want to go back to being a human. And
so it's more like, I'm bored with killing people. Yeah, it's like he's got to say in his Pinhead way.
It doesn't make any sense. It's like Pinhead's bored and sad, so he goes to Leviathan, and Leviathan's like, nope, I'm not letting you out of this deal. And he's like, well, what if I get somebody to replace me? And they're like, who? And he's like, what if I get Kirsty to replace me? And they're like, oh, shit, well, okay, I guess so. I'll let you go back to being a human again if you get Kirsty to take your place, but how the fuck? Yeah, like, that's gonna happen.
And so he's trying to get out of the
Kirsty and her
clown car of hell.
superhero team of like magicians and psychics and shit and priests and stuff are like the harrowers are going around the globe destroying all the puzzle boxes one at a time using magic rituals and stuff like that. Which I think was a concept set up in, I think there was a Harrowers series in the Barkerverse comics that came out from Marvel in the early 90s, but
I get this impression of a bunch of like Magic the Gathering players saying, now if I tap the right amount of land, I can, and use my proper blue-black deck combo, I can destroy this particular puzzle box from hell.
The series feels like that.
Oh dear.
So yeah, they go around like destroying boxes, and one at a time her friends get picked off by Cenobites, and basically Pinhead comes to her and is basically, after putting her through the fucking ringer, is like, but you'll get to see all your friends again if you become a Cenobite. And she's like, oh, fuck it, why not? I'll be a Cenobite. So she becomes Pinhead because there's only one fucking Cenobite, apparently. So she has to become Pinhead and be the exact same thing, but in like a white kimono instead of like leather.
Because that makes sense.
Yeah. And like, and all the shit about like why and how Leviathan creates the Cenobites, why these people are in hell, what all this shit has to do with anything, the war on the flesh, all that stuff from Epic Comics, from the Bible, is pretty much tossed out. Because, I mean, it's Clive Barker. I guess he can do whatever the fuck he wants with his creation, but at the same time, it's lame and it's lazy and it's stupid. So it's like a 12-issue plot to like, he basically switches places with Kirsty, and then like he goes back to being Elliot Spencer, and Elliot Spencer and Tiffany and whatever's left of the Harrowers go about continuing to destroy the boxes. I don't know how it's going to end, but it's like. And then Kirsty, like, aside from being a Cenobite and basically immediately taking over and becoming a fucking Cenobite, I guess in the last issue, she's like, a plane crashes and a box ends up in the fucking jungle, and the natives open it, and she's like, these people didn't open this fucking thing on purpose. So she takes the box away from them and goes back to hell with the box. And they're like, that's not how it works. You gotta fucking take them. And it's like her first day on the job, and the manager's like, no, you rang it up wrong. When you gotta do it this way. And she's like, but I don't want to do it that way.
Well, see, here's the thing. Someone just asked on my Facebook, why has Hellraiser become such a meme when it's so mediocre? And that's the thing.
It is it's the like imagery that he managed to combine with his. He was really interested in, because Clive Barker was friends with Coyle. That's how our Coyle aside. That's why they were originally going to do the soundtrack that totally did not work for the movie. There's a good reason that, I mean, they walked away because they got the feeling that it wasn't going to be used, so they were just kind of like parted company. They got the sensation that it was never seriously going to get used. So it's not like, fuck, this is shit, but Clive Barker was probably being too nice to them about it and trying to work with the studio and whatever. But Clive Barker was friends with them, and apparently he got the idea for Hellraiser hanging around with Coil because they had a bunch of like piercing and fetish mags laying around, and Clive Barker like flipped through them, and that's where he got the idea because they have all these like piercing magazines and shit like that. So the sadomasochism imagery that was brought into it, and all this like kind of like dark fetish imagery combined with like body modification and like, I mean, up to that point you have all these like fucked up zombie looking killers, horribly scarred maggot ridden Jason Voorhees after like 6 movies, where it's like, yeah, it's all very blah, but these people, they weren't faceless. They had a lot of detail to them, and they were different. So I think that's what really piqued people's interest and imagination. You have these like dark leather clad things with all these like different looks to them that were all very inventive, which I think is the reason that it has persisted for so long, because everybody wants the fucking Hellraiser action figures, but nobody wants to watch the fucking movies. Like, that's
exactly. And one thing for me is, I'm not really overly interested in the new comics. They're okay. I think I like them a little bit more than you, but I forget all about them after I read them. And that is, I don't give one shit about the original characters. I enjoy the concept of Hellraiser, but I don't care about the characters. To me, they were just throwaway characters for a story. How come we're still talking about Kirsty? She's like, why? Why?
Yeah, and why is... Well, I mean, the why is because Pinhead is bored.
She was never developed as a character.
One person that's ever beat him, so...
She was never developed as a character. The fucking throwaway character... The original throwaway character, which is Pinhead, was designed as, well, a throwaway character. And Kirsty, why is he, I don't understand. Like, Kirsty, first of all, I don't give a shit about Kirsty or Frank or anything like that. To me, Hellraiser... I understand it's Clive Barker's creation. That's great. But to me, Hellraiser is about different stories coming from this this hell environment and this hell thing.
And it just completely harps on the same goddamn story over and over.
Yeah. People are like, when I had a friend talking about like, well, I want to know what happens to Kirsty. I'm like,
Kirsty's not an interesting character. She's a fucking cipher. She is every girl in a horror movie ever.
There's nothing interesting about her. I mean, Pinhead is more developed.
She's the damsel in distress. She like, in the movie, it goes even further by having like the like worker dude that was working for her father that she starts dating. He shows up at the end and saves her. So it's not even like she's a strong female character in horror movies. She fucking like... She unsolves the puzzle box, but other than that, like, some dude shows up to save her. It's...
Let me put it this way. The entire beginning part of Aliens that was cut out and is in the director's cut tells more about Ripley as a character than everything put out for Hellraiser so far tells about Kirsty. Just put it in perspective.
Yeah. I mean, she's a cipher who's scared and wants her daddy, and like the first movie, she's just there to be creeped out and get molested on by her uncle.
Yeah.
And the second movie, she's trying to save who she thinks is her dad in hell, but it turns out it's Frank again because she's dumb. So the whole thing with the second movie, she goes to hell to save her father. He's not even there, and she's too stupid to like...
Now, one thing I liked
her better as a murderer who kills her husband.
Yeah. That
at least gave her some depth, but these new comics add nothing. She's just a driven, crazy girl who's made it her mission to destroy every box. But looking at it, really, how many good people are being destroyed by these fucking boxes?
Mm-hmm.
I mean... The point of the Cenobites is to bring the people that escape back to hell, and that's where Frank belonged, so...
Yeah.
And Julia, for her part, so it makes sense that, like, I don't know why she's trying to stop them. They didn't fuck her over. Frank did.
Right. I was just going to talk about an anthology that I'll probably pick up, because I guess if you like the Hellraiser stuff, but don't want to, like, watch the movies with their harping on the same fucking stories, which is probably also why I liked Inferno as well, is because it doesn't harp on the same retarded characters.
Don't give it too much credit. Some of the stories may end up being the exact same goddamn thing.
True. Anyway, Paul Kane edited a book called Hellbound Hearts that came out not all that long ago. It's got stories that take place, the Hellraiser stories by Neil Gaiman. I guess artists like Dave McKean and Mike Mignola, Steve Niles, Kelly Armstrong. Did I already say Steve Niles? Anyway, he's on there. And by the way, this is what Steve Niles had to say on Twitter when I asked him about the book. Or actually, I wanted him to say something about Hellraiser, and he said he wrote a short story for the Prose Hellraiser anthology. And then he said, my editor said he needed to shower after reading it. I was so proud. So that's what Mr. Niles has to say about that. So that might be an interesting book to read.
I wonder if his editor is a pussy.
I'm assuming edited by Paul Kane. I'm assuming he means Paul Kane.
If it's Paul Kane, he sounds like a puss.
It might have just been just a really disgusting story. Who knows? I mean, I haven't read it. I can't really.
Of course, I got no problem with a Serbian film. So
yeah, see, that's what I was saying. Me either. So I actually want to see the Human Centipede. So I'm like, whatever.
I just haven't because it just seems kind of dumb. Not because there's anything really that wrong with the concept.
Oh man,
it just seems like kind of lame.
A bottle of bourbon, a bottle of cola, and that.
Now, if I had some friends who wanted to watch it, I would totally watch it with other people. I'm not going to watch it by myself because it's like, that's the problem. Exactly. I don't have anybody to watch shitty movies with anymore.
Oh,
Sharia doesn't watch that stuff with me. Sharia doesn't even have time for good shit, much less shitty things. I can't even get people to watch fucking Mystery Science Theater 3000 with me. So, the trials and travails of my life. I don't have anybody to watch TV with. So
I'm sorry, buddy. I'm not there for you to watch shitty movies with.
The ultimate in first world problems.
That's true.
So yeah, some pros would probably be decent, but yeah,
the comics.
I think the comics are terrible. I like the comics less than the movies, probably because I think the greatest symptom of over explanation, over analyzing, and over-identifying with the same characters is so prevalent in the comics that it makes the first four movies look good in comparison as far as the amount of horror and mystery it ramps up. But the art is great. I mean, I've got really no problems with a lot of the visual look. I mean, it's kind of simplistic. It reminds me of some of the early 90s shit. It's not quite as detailed as a lot of stuff these days, but
right, and
it's not bad looking.
Whereas I read a lot more comics more frequent. I read a lot more comics than Ryan does. Ryan has been a real peach by reading all this stuff. So my shitty comic threshold is probably a bit higher.
That's why I don't read comics, because I don't like reading shitty comics.
Right. Where I don't think the Hellraiser comics are that bad. My friend Ed
For comics, no. I'm just talking about as a Hellraiser product.
Right, my friend Ed K seems to love the comics. He says they're fucking awesome. Best Hellraiser since the first movie.
No, Ed, they're not awesome.
Best Hellraiser since the first movie.
Not even slightly.
And
There's nothing good about the comics at all, except for the art.
And Ed K is a reviewer for Newsarama, does Hyper Geek.
Or did.
And is written for the Judge Dredd magazine and stuff like that before. So he's actually quite an awesome guy. So when it's not just Ed.
I like Ed, but no.
Yeah, he's not some slabbering fanboy. He's like,
Ed.
I'm gonna masturbate to more Pinhead bullshit. He's not like that. So, but maybe he is. I don't know.
Yeah,
he is hairy. Ed, you're hairy. Which means you're a freak. See how judgmental.
Listen here, you monkey-looking cunt.
It's okay too because Ed uses the word cunt frequently. So does his wife.
He's British.
They're British.
It's okay.
Yeah, they're British.
Not that I care about who I call a cunt, but.
Yeah. So it's totally cool. But yeah, I'm assuming I just asked him if he means the new ones or if he means masterpieces. But I'm going to assume, unless he corrects me, that he means the new series, which I don't think is horrible. I will say, as far as properties go, that the 28 Days Later comics that were written were way better to a property than the Hellraiser comics, although I'm assuming Clive Barker is okaying the Hellraiser comics, so...
Well, I mean, he's writing it. He's writing the Hellraiser comics.
Well, is he writing the scripts, or is he
he's
just
writing? He is the only consistent writer on all of them. It's Clive Barker and somebody, but he's right. I mean, he's overseeing this story. The story is the problem.
Mean? What does that mean? He's going to be attached as a co-writer on anything Hellraiser related, for one. Two.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, he can get both know character credits, but he isn't going to be listed as. He's listed as top writer on everything.
Two, we all know that co-writing anything, especially comics, he could write a paragraph. This is what occurs in the comic, and then someone else scripts it all out. Which
that's true, but the major flaw is not the scripting; it is the plot.
That's
true. The scripting is fine. The dialogue is fine. It's just the overall plot arc of the whole thing is dog shit. The whole concept behind this storyline is terrible.
Right. All I'm saying is, and no disrespect meant to Clive Barker or the writer on the comic, Clive Barker could just write more Cenobites? Issue 4. That's it. That's all he has to do to get a co-writer credit on his own creation. So
that's true, but they're marketing it and it's credited as if he is doing the lion's share of writing.
Yeah, it's probably his plot idea.
Yeah. So I mean, even if he is plotting just the arc and not even the individual issues, it's still bad. I think the worst part of the comics is Clive Barker's contribution. Clive Barker is the cancer that is killing the Hellraiser comic.
Oh, that's I just think it's kind of mediocre.
To quote a horrible 4chanism.
What's that? Oh, the cancer.
X is the cancer that is killing Y.
Yeah, I mean, like I said,
yeah, it's the main problem is not the writing. It's definitely not the art. It's the comics look great. The problem is I don't buy or like the concept of Pinhead turning into some sort of I'm bored, I want to go back to being a person whiner, and then him and Kirsty switch places, and then he just basically becomes Kirsty, because neither of them have a character, really, obviously, but they have no personality, so it's just he takes over and he becomes a harrower and destroys boxes, and she becomes Pinhead and takes people's lives. It's
Pinhead's, it's the classic, it's a mixture of two tropes. One is the superhero or super being or god or whatever becomes a person.
And stealing from the movie Trading Places?
Yeah, basically. And then the other person...
In this case, Dan Aykroyd is Pinhead, and Eddie Murphy is Kirsty. And they switch places, and I guess by the end, they both learn something about being a Cenobite.
I guess so. I was going to say
obviously, it's not going to end with Kirsty being a Cenobite. I don't know if Elliot Spencer's going to go back to being a Pinhead again or what, but...
Well, my prediction
or if there's just going to be neither of them, they're both going to get out of it and it's going to kill off Pinhead for good. Fingers crossed, but I have my doubts.
They're not going to kill off Pinhead for good. My prediction is that Pinhead stays.
Well, it's not going to affect the movies. I mean, if anything, it would only affect the comic. So, I mean, if anybody's going to kill off Pinhead, at least as a concept... As far as comics and literature form goes, it'll be Clive Barker. But
in summation of the whole Hellraiser property, my big beef is, one, they explain way too much. It should be left in the mystery. You hear that, Mr. Barker? Leave some shit the mystery. No one wants this shit explained. Maybe when I say no one, I really mean myself.
And if you're going to explain it, don't let it be so goddamn conventional and boring.
Right.
It's something as alien as the concept of creatures coming from hell and taking people away. Shouldn't it be a little more than just a bland copy paste of every other concept about hell or what torment might be like with fetish gear?
He does have to use familiar tropes, man. Remember?
But that's the thing. It's said in the fucking Epic Comics Bible that it bears no similarity to Judeo-Christian hell, because that's boring and lame, and the Jews and Christians are going to basically find out that their concept of hell was wrong and have to deal with it for eternity, and then basically turns it into that anyway.
Yep.
Because he's a lazy writer, and he spent too much time getting away from horror and too much time doing fantasy, so I think he feels like he has to be more plot heavy as opposed to letting the dread do the work.
I also think, and Clive Barker is welcome to, if he ever heard this podcast, but I do like Clive Barker. He seems like an awesome dude, but he's welcome to disagree with me on this. But I think he fell too much in love with his own characters. And as a writer, you're a writer, I'm a writer, we do this. People fall in love with their own characters. And Pinhead should have just been this bizarre detached individual who murders people or whatever, is a Cenobite, is a demon, instead of being this likable dude from World War I who...
Yeah, he doesn't need to have a personality. He doesn't need to be reflective. The stories are supposed to be a horror about other people dealing with this shit, not about his story. Pinhead's story is not an interesting story because where's the horror in that? What kind of like conflicts and resolution is Pinhead even really facing in this comic? His conflict is, I don't want to be Pinhead anymore. I want to go back to being Elliot Spencer. And then he gets it and like then just goes about doing the exact same shit that Kirsty was doing. So what was the point?
I would have written Pinhead as someone who had to save something in his family and has to do and figures out that the answer to his problem is in hell. And so in order to become a Cenobite, he has to do incredibly depraved, fucked up, horrible things to do that. And he becomes the very thing he's trying to save his family from. Like, in fact, you could actually twist it to where he is what he's trying to save his family from in some bizarre, horrible hell twist. And then he's like this terribly tragic figure. As cliche as that sounds, I think I just wrote Pinhead better than Clive Barker did.
I just wouldn't have explained it because it's better just to not even make them people. The idea that they were something is completely irrelevant to the plots.
But to Clive Barker's credit, no one was really doing this shit before Clive Barker was, at least not without getting not getting the attention he was. So kudos to Clive Barker, because I don't know if I could have come up with I can write that better than Clive Barker, unless Clive Barker had written it in the first place in my own bizarre hell twists. So,
But yeah,
anyway.
Hellbound Heart, not a bad idea. I mean, I like Clive Barker as a writer. He seems like a nice guy. Like what you said, but no, he can't refute me because
in a kind of way
he would be fucking wrong.
In a weird way, Clive Barker actually opened his own puzzle box, and this is the hell he unleashed. So,
I mean, as far as like they just wanted a Hellraiser comic and he wanted to tell a story, it's fine, but I don't think it works conceptually. I don't think it is satisfying as a Hellraiser story, and it's definitely not horror. I mean, it's got a lot of gore, but I mean, it's just a gory tale of Kirsty and Pinhead's relationship with each other. It's a drama about these two people.
Right.
And what they want, and realizing that they're in love with each other. If it ends with them going out with each other, I will have called it. Neither of them are Pinhead, and they end up in love.
By the way, another thing I want to mention how Clive Barker wrote that I really, really, really enjoyed when I was younger was the Damnation game.
See, I never read that. That was one of the ones that I always meant to read, either that or The Great and Secret Show, but I never did.
Also good.
And then he, shortly after I started reading his stuff, he went to he did Weave World and Imagica, and then it became a lot more like fantasy aimed at not adults, but younger people.
Yep, I was going to say the torture, like Nicole.
Probably a better choice anyway. I think horror as a literary form kind of hit hard times and became less interesting for most writers anyway.
Yep. My girlfriend collects the Tortured Souls toys.
I got a couple of those.
They're really cool. Yeah, I mean, Clive Barker. I would like to point out the very positive things Clive Barker has done to the horror industry and to fantasy and other genres. In the fact that I would actually say that some of Clive Barker's stuff is up there with Brian Lumley for me, and Brian Lumley is my favorite horror writer. Period. And so it's just weird that Hellraiser would become. I think it's because of Pinhead is why, and Clive Barker's Undying. Remember that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I never played it. My friend was a huge fan, and I watched him play it a little. I think I tried playing it much later after the fact, but I mean, a 6 or 8 year old Unreal Engine game.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's
basically
pretty
a shooter is not going to be.
It had some cool elements to it, and I haven't played Jericho yet.
Oh, Jericho is apparently a fucking turd. Apparently, it's bad beyond imagining. Yeah, Clive Barker has good concepts and good aesthetic sense, but, I mean...
I guess the short story from...
His writing is a mixed bag.
Well, I was going to say, short story, The Forbidden, which is a good story, was the basis for Candyman.
Yeah, that's actually in the book I've got. I'm not sure if I've ever... I can't remember it. It's got that... I forget if it's called The Madonna, and, the story In the Flesh. I think In the Flesh may have been the one I read. I forget. I read recently. I tried rereading those, and that's the only one I remember is the first story in the book. I mean, it was mainly 3 large short stories in the entire thing.
And what were you saying? You were saying that writing's not his bag?
I said his writing is a mixed bag.
Oh, mixed bag. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't
he's
hear that
very
correctly.
iffy. Like some of his
Weeworld
short
is great.
stories I thought were like really mediocre for like your typical like horror tales.
Whereas Weaveworld is probably some of the best dark fantasy that I've ever read. Like, I mean, that's to me is a strong suit. It's just, it doesn't, and a Magica and all this other stuff.
I really liked Cabal. I mean, I liked Cabal a
yeah.
lot more than Nightbreed, but
well, Nightbreed, I had a friend that was obsessed with that film, and I didn't understand why. It wasn't that great of a movie, but
he's not an exceptional director. I mean, I really liked Lord of Illusions.
Yeah, that was actually with Scott Bakula, right?
But yeah, the idea of doing basically kind of like film noir magic movie about like private detective who also is involved with like magic stuff and supernatural elements, that was interesting. I mean, it was kind of like Cast a Deadly Spell or something.
Oh, I love that movie. Yeah. So.
I mean, that's the kind of idea that I thought was kind of fresh. Like, I still need to read the short story for Lord of Illusions, or novella, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Isn't it actually called Lord of Illusions?
The Last Illusion from Books of Blood.
The Last Illusion. Yeah, they put that in my copy of Cabal. They tagged that on at the end of the paperback that I bought. And still need to read it. But yeah, I really like the movie. I thought that was the one movie Clive Barker did that actually met up to the par. I don't know if the ending was that great, but yeah, Scott Bakula really worked too.
Yeah, it's got Scott Bakula and Famke Janssen.
Yeah,
so.
And who doesn't like young Famke Janssen?
I like old Famke Janssen. Are you kidding?
Any flavor of Famke Janssen you can get.
Yeah, she's hot. And so yeah, I mean,
good actress.
To put this all into perspective, although we're kind of ripping, especially Ryan ripping on Hellraiser and Clive Barker, we do like a lot of this stuff.
And yet I own 8 Hellraiser movies. So
that's true. At least you bought the ticket.
Of course, I also own like shitty Italian science fiction movies. So that's saying
true.
A lot.
That is true.
Anywho, we've been talking about Hellraiser and Clive Barker long enough. We appreciate you, Clive Barker, but yeah.
Yeah, I like your stuff a little more.
Not a fan of your latest work, but I hope you do something cool soon.
Yeah, let's. I mean, I'm curious to see if the Hellraiser will get re-released, and I'm always interested in seeing more Clive Barker stuff out there to read, and maybe actually comics based on his other properties, or Hellraiser comics that aren't based on Pinhead and Kirsty. That's maybe I'm just sick and tired of these characters because they suck. I don't know. I mean, Pinhead doesn't really suck that bad, but he looks cool.
Yeah, and that's what he's been coasting on for a long time. He's striking, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
Sorry, Clive.
Oh.
Sorry, person that will never hear this podcast.
That's true. Clive Barker will never hear this podcast.
Which is why I'm not particularly apologetic.
That's true. I'm always apologetic about stuff, but these are criticisms we'd probably say to his face.
No, I know I would, but we could have a discussion about why he chose to go that route. But yeah, I'm not a fan with the direction he chose to go, but I mean, hey, it's his comic, and I don't have to read it.
Oh, here's actually another someone just weighed in really quick on the Facebooks. It's my friend Jesse over in Spokane. I think the story's been played out enough. I would like to see some of Barker's other works made into movies. Ones like The Race, In the Flesh, Books of Blood. I assume he means from Books of Blood. That would be more exciting, in my opinion. Yeah. And Jess, I agree, dude. Like we were just saying that. So
yeah.
And I think that's it for. Is there anything else? Like what? Anything else we want to talk about before? No.
It's over 2 hours that we've been recording.
It'll probably be back down to an hour and a half again. Oh, dear God.
Sweet baby Jesus.
Sweet baby Jesus.
Editing.
Editing. There'll be a lot of editing on this one. I'm sorry, Ryan.
It's okay.
Anyway, thanks for listening to our rambling podcast as usual. I'm Steve Saunders.
I'm Ryan Speck.
And until next time.
We are sorry.
Terribly sorry. So sorry. I support child pornography. 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 I support child pornography, but whatever.